We're going to get started. If everyone can hear me okay, it is 3 minutes after start time by my computer. I'm David Swanson. I'm a co-founder and executive director of World Beyond War, and I'm joined here by Greta Zarro, who is our organizing director at World Beyond War. And so I will talk a little bit about campaigns to ban militarized policing and how we've succeeded up to a point with one here in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the United States. And then Greta will talk a bit about how you can pursue these campaigns and how you can use them to organize, and how World Beyond War can help you out a great deal in making them happen. And then we'll open this up and have discussion, including you can use the chat function, and you can use the raise your hand, either physically raise your hand and hope we spot you, or figure out how to raise your hand in the Zoom sense of clicking the raise your hand button. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can post comments on YouTube, and we'll do our best to also get over there and spot them and answer those questions. So there is obviously this wave of activism, in particular around the United States, in particular since a police murder in Minneapolis, and there have been actions taken or begun or introduced by numerous cities and states across the United States, including proposals to really shift resources out of policing and incarceration, actions that expose the wrongdoing and records of the police, steps to remove immunity so police officers can be prosecuted for crimes like anyone else, banning of particular weapons, banning of various militarized and crowd control and other outrageous weaponry in various cities. And one thing that we've done here in Charlottesville was to get the city council to ban military training of police and the acquiring of military weaponry by police from the US military. And these are relatively very, very easy steps. These are things that if you can find the one or two sponsors on your local government to introduce them, nobody's going to vote against them. And nobody's going to put up an argument that it's a national issue, not a city issue, because it's, in fact, literally entirely a city issue. The city police, the county police, the whatever your jurisdiction is, and nobody's going to complain about the cost, because it's literally a cost of $0. We're not talking about spending any money, and it's something that should be pursued with as broad and wide-ranging and diverse a coalition as you can put together. So that peace groups and anti-racism groups like Black Lives Matter and every other possible civil liberties group and good government group that you can bring together are all on board and understand that you're not proposing some legislation in competition with some other legislation, and you're not proposing to demilitarize the police but not defund it or anything. You need to, avoid these easy misunderstandings and disagreements, and make sure you have a coalition that represents and looks like your community. And then look at the page that I put the link in the chat, or go to WorldBeyondWar.org and click through the big graphics that we have at the top of the homepage, and click on the one that says, here's how to demilitarize your police. This was also a link that was in the information about this Zoom call, so I assume you've seen it, and some of you actually read it already. But there's a draft there of a resolution that you can start with and do a little outreach in your community and find out how it should be modified. There are also some links to find out some easy information about what military weaponry exists in your local police department. But I want to stress, and I can't stress this enough, and we'll probably say it 5 times before we're done this evening, but it's critical to ban militarized policing, whether or not it's currently happening. So our city is not doing what some of these evil cities do is no reason. In fact, just the opposite. This is the best reason to get your city council to ban such behaviors in the future, because it's easy. They have no excuse not to. That being said, if you look up whether your locality has acquired weaponry from the US military, and it hasn't, or it hasn't for a few years, chances are still very good that it has military weaponry, but it got it somewhere else. It bought it from weapons dealers. It got it somewhere. So you can go with the draft petition / resolution that we've got on that webpage, or you can modify it and come up with your own. But figure out the weaponry that you think has no business being in your local police department and ban it wherever it came from. This is a step we have not yet done in Charlottesville. It's also worth what we have banned in Charlottesville military weaponry from the US military, which is the primary source of it, but not the only source of it, not even here. And we've banned military or warrior style training, and we can talk about what that is, no matter what the source, no matter who's providing it. So that one we got solid. We also wanted to require de-escalation training, and that's in the draft petition. We haven't yet got that here, but we've got one reason to talk about this as the least that can be done is because it really is the least that can be done, and it's also a step. And literally in the conversation where we got them to vote and pass this unanimously in the city council in Charlottesville, the majority of the city council members agreed that they were going to go further, and we were going to have more discussions and take further steps. So this is a step. I know some other cities are doing even weaker steps than this one, at least as I see it. Oakland and Berkeley are pursuing a very long, complex resolution, but that requires the police to ask the city's permission every time they do something militaristic. Why? Why not just ban doing militaristic things? I don't know. But that may be an option that can be pursued in your jurisdiction. I think we have to modify this for every locality. But we can work with you. We can help you with outreach to other groups, with building an email list, with drafting and putting online a petition and getting signatures, with pursuing media coverage that will boost the petition and then get more signatures and then get more media coverage, and with how to persuade city council members. And so, you know, step by step, get everything lined up, get the coalition, get as many, you know, high profile and important endorsers, start gathering signatures, keep gathering endorsers, and start moving the city council or the county board or whatever it is, and figure out when they have their meetings, how the public can present things at the meetings, presumably by Zoom, and how to get something on their agenda to be voted on. And be prepared to compromise, be prepared to say, we'll be happy for the moment with a resolution that drops this one item, but also be prepared to pressure them harder. I mean, here in Charlottesville, I was extremely disappointed with their lack of responsiveness at first, and I was rather firm about denouncing them publicly in the media, and it happened to work. I didn't think it was going to work, but it did work. And the next meeting, they came back and passed the thing, moaning and whining about it, but passed it. So it takes paying attention to what's happening locally and being prepared to adjust. But I think it differs everywhere. So the important thing here is to get to your questions and concerns. So with that in mind, I'll pass the virtual mic over to Greta Zarro.
Thanks, David. This is so exciting to me that you were able to do this quite easily, and I'm so excited for the possibilities to replicate this campaign in cities worldwide. I just wanted to introduce myself and World Beyond War a little bit. So my name is Greta Zarro, and I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War. And my role is to help volunteers around the world to start events and campaigns and activities like this one in their communities. So do reach out to us. You can go to our website, WorldBeyondWar.org, and contact us, because that's what our job is, to help you with this and to help set up petitions and to make social media graphics and to publicize your events and campaigns through our email list, through our website, to provide you with trainings and webinars, and to help you with creating educational materials like fact sheets. So definitely do be in contact with us so that we can help to amplify your work on these kinds of issues. David, I do have some questions for you about the campaign. One question is, how did you build a coalition in your community to build a diversity of support for this issue?
Well, we did not do as good a job of that as we should have, and as we have many times in the past. And one excuse for that is the coronavirus pandemic. But we succeeded nonetheless. We succeeded despite the fact that everyone speaking at these Zoom meetings of the city council was talking about David Swanson's petition, rather than a petition that 1,000 people and all kinds of organizations had signed, and I couldn't get them to stop that. And despite people denouncing me for being white and male and so forth, nonetheless, we passed it. But we would have been stronger with a bigger, broader, more diverse coalition. That being said, we did get quite a number of groups, including religious groups, which is the furthest thing from my own, area of interest, and legal groups and human rights groups and immigrants relief groups and former mayors and other, important figures to sign on. Again, not nearly as many as usual. This is something we've done in Charlottesville many times. As you know, Greta, last summer we got Charlottesville to divest from fossil fuels and weapons companies. And we've, gotten them to tell Congress to move the money from the military and don't attack Iran and don't attack, 8 other places. So we're sort of used to doing this here, and we did not get as good a coalition, but at the same time, we did get some overlap and teamwork with the Black Lives Matter and other activists who were at the same time getting a lot of media and doing big demonstrations in the street. And it was seen by the public and the city council as sort of all one big issue. And this was a first step that could be taken, that everyone would support, and then they would take more steps. And so I think we appeared to have maybe a better organized coalition than we actually had put together.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think going back to something that you said earlier, I think when people hear about this kind of campaign, the first thing that kind of comes to mind is, oh my gosh, I have to do all of this research. I have to figure out if my city is, has militarized policing. And a lot of times, unfortunately, I've seen that as an obstacle to campaigns when activists just get bogged down in, research and don't actually get out there, in the streets and talking to their elected officials and doing the work of organizing. And obviously there's a balance, right? There's some research needed in certain cases. But can you kind of talk through that process? Like, what research was needed on your end to get this started, or how could people just start this in their communities?
Well, in general, I think you're making a very important point, which is that we shouldn't get bogged down in needing to know more information in order to act. We're demanding something very simple and moral, and it's the responsibility of the government to know what it's doing. And if they don't know what the local police department is doing, that's a problem. And if they can't get the local police department to tell them what it's doing, that's a problem. In fact, it benefited us in Charlottesville that at least one city council member in particular was outraged at the lack of honesty from the chief of police when they were asking what the local police were doing. And that certainly helped us. But I do think I do think it's always better, all else equal, to know more than to know less. And I think, I say this as someone who's about to disappear for 2 weeks and write a book, but Greta and the rest of our staff and volunteers will do what they can, and I'll help when I get back to help you all out with any research. And we've tried to put the best links we can on that page on the website, and we will add any more there that we can. But on the one hand, the important thing is to demand a ban on militarized policing, whether or not it's happening. And in the process, to demand to know whether or not it's happening. So that requires zero research. You can start this minute. But to the extent that you can find anything out, it may be particularly helpful now because, at least in the case of my city council, these people are stressed out by this pandemic and by not knowing what they're supposed to do to protect people from a deadly disease when they're in a country that is apparently trying to spread it at the federal level. So to the extent that you can help them out, answer their questions, do their research, write the resolution for them, make it easy as pie for your local legislators, so much the better. But I wouldn't let any concerns about that slow you down.
Yeah, and as you said, we have a draft resolution on our website that people can take and modify, so you don't have to start from scratch. We have lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to switch to the participants' questions. And if you haven't had a chance to ask your question, please do start putting your questions into the chat so we can read them. You can also use the raise hand feature, as David said. So click on participants and then click raise hand, and we will see your Zoom raised hand and call on you. And if you're on the telephone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. So some of the questions coming in. The first question is, how have you funded this work?
Well, in the past, even most recently last summer, when we passed a resolution here locally on divestment, which we encourage, and Greta is the pro at helping you if you want to do it where you live, we did form a sort of a committee, a local coalition, and got some donations and paid for some advertising and other expenses. We didn't do any of that here. World Beyond War is funded overwhelmingly by small donations from individuals, and overwhelmingly through the website, WorldBeyondWar.org/donate. That's the funding. But it is possible to raise funds locally for a particular project. It's not that hard. On the other hand, I don't know what funds would really be needed. If you can work with us, and we've got tips and guidance and assistance to help you to try to use free media, that is, get this story reported as news on your local TV networks and newspapers and radio shows, then you don't necessarily need to buy radio ads and print ads. You can get all of that stuff for free. And of course, it's worth thousands of times more to get it for free. You can't really pay for what you can get for free. So I really wouldn't worry about funding unless you're envisioning something much grander than what I'm talking about, something easier than, just about easier than participating in a Zoom call. Getting your local city to pass this sort of resolution. It shouldn't require, big bucks.
Okay, the next question is about organizing tactics. And I think especially in the time of the coronavirus pandemic, the question is about, were you out there in the streets collecting petition signatures? Did you only do it through like an online petition? Or what were some of the tactics that you used to build support?
Yeah, I've hardly left this room in months, and we used the old internets, and that's not normal, right? Usually we do events, we do media events, press events in front of the city council building. We do flyering at big public events. We pack the city council meeting room. We line up people early to sign up for all the spots where the public gets to speak for 3 minutes each at the start of the meeting, and we pack the room and somebody says, stand up if you agree with us, and the whole room stands up. And that works every time. And the fact that we didn't do that, I think, had something to do with the fact that we had this one meeting where we brought this up and the city council just, showed no sign of life, just lay there dead. But I think, this is entirely possible. And it took us, another couple of weeks, but use the internet, set up a petition, promote it, get other groups to promote it, get the corporate media to promote it, whether they mean to or not. And if there's a truly safe and responsible way to go beyond that, great. But you don't necessarily need to. Certainly we didn't here.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks to reach out to us for help with setting up your petition. We use something called the Action Network platform, which we purchased, so we have access to that platform, and you can work with us to put your petition up on that platform. Okay, the next question is about organizing in a very small town setting. Someone says that they come from a very small town in Pennsylvania. Does organizing look different when you're in a very small town? Are there examples of small towns that have done this kind of organizing and petitioning?
Well, compared to a lot of places, Charlottesville is a small town. It's 40,000 people or so, plus another 10,000 university students. It's often confused with Charlotte, North Carolina, which is roughly 17 times larger. This is a town with 5 city council members, one of whom is the mayor. Once you've got 2 or 3 of them, you're good. So it's a pretty small community where knowing people makes a lot of difference. On a lot of things, what makes more difference than the particular size of the town or city is the state you're in. I think these boroughs in Pennsylvania have something of the problem that we often have in Virginia, which is that the state government doesn't let the local governments do anything. But I think Virginia is worse than Pennsylvania. And I think on this issue, we're good. I think on this issue, to my knowledge, there are not state governments, at least yet, preventing local governments from doing anything. So I think, it's if anything, generally easier the smaller the town, especially if it's a town that's not so small that it literally has no media. But if it has a little newspaper of some sort, or a television network or 2 of some sort in the general region that you can make use of, and if there are groups or individuals with email lists or clubs or societies, or just a local Amnesty International chapter, or a local peace center, or a local ACLU, or whatever sort of groups that you can bring together and form a coalition, well, you're gonna get a handful of the right people on board, and you're gonna find it pretty easy sailing compared to doing this in New York City, I think.
That's a good segue to the next question about whether this has happened on the statewide level yet in any states.
It's a good question. I don't know. And it is something that we need to research. Greta and I have been talking about putting a list of successes and related successes on that webpage, and we'll be working on that. Including successes that World Beyond War had nothing to do with, but that are part of this same movement. There certainly are states, including New York State, that have taken steps, including holding police accountable and exposing their records and so forth, since this latest outburst of activism. Whether there are states that have forbidden military weaponry and military training in local police departments and state police departments, I don't know. I doubt it, but I hope I'm wrong, and I hope somebody on here can tell me I'm wrong. That would be wonderful. But um, I think it is valuable to be able to say, here's all the weapons Seattle banned. Here's what Charlottesville passed. Here's what they did in Philadelphia and New York, and so that it's a trend. It's something that cities a little bit bigger or comparable to your own have done, and city council members don't feel like they're being radical, or they're following what's a good established practice, and a trend that's happening nationally. Usually that will help. And similarly with looking up whether there's militarized weaponry in your town or city, also look up nearby towns and cities and comparable towns and cities, because you can point to the danger of what can happen. And it's and it's not an issue of political preference or partisanship or lifestyle worldview. It's a question of life and death. The studies are very clear. The police departments that get more military weaponry kill many more civilians. So this is, this shouldn't be a partisan or ideological question. This should be a question of basic responsible governance.
Thanks, David. We have a question about what's happening in Portland with these reports about unidentified federal militarized agents, and whether this is coming down the pipeline and other cities should be worried about this. We also have Allison Cole on the call, who would like to give a report from Portland. So Allison, I will let you unmute so you can talk about your experience there.
Hi everyone, my name's Allison Cole and I live in Portland. Are there any other Portlanders in this call? Maybe?
A lot of people are muted, so who knows?
Or maybe write in the chat. Okay, great. I see you. I see someone. So I'm working on a draft of the petition that David and Greta worked on in Charlottesville for Portland, Oregon, for the city of Portland and for Multnomah County, which is the county that covers the majority of our city. And so the petition will be directed at both the Portland Police Bureau and the Multnomah County Sheriff. Right now, the petition is not public because I'm working really hard to garner up endorsements behind the scenes. This petition will fail if it doesn't have complete support from the Black-led justice organizations in our city. And so that's what matters to us the most first. So our focus is there, and we will be making some changes to the language, and I'd be happy to discuss that more later on. I definitely don't want to monopolize any time here. There's something fascinating happening in Oregon at the state level as well. So our state formed a new committee on police reform and use of force, and it is a Black-led committee in the legislature. They're passing a slew of bills that are very progressive, and one of them is limits on use of tools directed at crowds. It's not about using tools on individuals. Tools is a euphemism for weapons. And right now, the draft legislation for this in the whole state is that all chemical incapacitants, such as tear gas, will be banned. All large sound devices, sound cannons, also banned. Impact projectiles are still allowed, but you can only shoot a specific person in the arms, legs, or stomach. And you can still use pepper spray. So it's not a perfect bill, but it does start to chip away at the weaponry that any law enforcement agency in the state of Oregon is allowed to use. Also, an interesting thing about the bill in Oregon is that it requires that all law enforcement in the state of Oregon, whether it's local police, sheriff, or state police, they cannot use any proxies to deal swift blows onto the crowd because they're not allowed to. So they're not allowed to use they're not allowed to say like cooperate with federal agents. And also, if any federal forces come into the state of Oregon for the purposes of crowd control, it is on all Oregon law enforcement to make sure that federal forces follow all of Oregon's rules. So federal forces wouldn't be allowed to use tear gas or sound cannons. They'd only be able to shoot certain types of projectiles at certain people in certain places as the bill language is currently written. So that's just an update of what's going on in Oregon.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'd love to hear more about the petition language maybe later once we get through some of these questions. So I want to move on to another question, which is about to David. Were there any objections that you faced during this campaign, and kind of what messaging did you use to overcome those objections? Like, for example, objections about safety and security, and the police need all of these weapons at their disposal and this training, to make us more secure.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to Allison, and people should ask Allison questions about Portland, I think. But I think that the general answer to the previous question is yes, this could happen. What's happened in Portland could happen anywhere, and we need to be prepared for it and preempt it with appropriate legislation. As with most of these things that you can bring to your city council, there's not usually a big organized opposition. There may be some reluctance on certain points among city council members. And I think the main reason, the main reason we got what we got out of them, and not more and not less, was because that's what I had drafted as the petition. But when I talked with city council members about banning weaponry no matter the source, at least one of them was very reluctant, wanted to defer to the police. If the police think they need rubber bullets, who am I, a mere city council member, to tell them otherwise? I don't have expertise in rubber bullets. There could be people who really need rubber bulleting, and so in order to pass something and get something done, I was happy to have them ban getting weaponry from the U.S. military, which is a big problem, something that's happened in years gone by here, even if not in the past couple of years, and then to ban all military training, no matter where it comes from. But to get them to do more was, the biggest demand. When we had these, meetings on city council meetings on Zoom with comments from the public, there was not a single member of the public saying do less. There were quite a few saying do more. There were a number of people demanding that the resolution be taken off the agenda until it could be made stronger and include additional measures. So it's a judgment call. What do you think you can get? How quickly? And is it important to try to get something while this issue is in the news, and then advance the discussion and get it further? But to the extent that we can come up with the best, most concise, most persuasive information about automatic rifles and rubber bullets and tear gas and each of these types of weapons, in order to give it to these city council members who are afraid they don't know enough, that may be helpful. We're up against supposedly representative governments that are supposedly representing the public and supposedly overseeing the police departments, deferring to the police departments. The police departments should get to tell us what they're allowed to do, and so you have to bear in mind that that's what you're challenging, and so you may be able to overcome that on certain points, and it may take longer on others.
Thanks, David. And if you're just joining us, you can put questions in the chat box. You can also use the raise hand feature, click participants, and then click raise hand, and we will call on you. We do see some raised hands. We will get to you. And if you're on the telephone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. So one question from John Mixad, one of our chapter coordinators in the New York City metro area. He says, why is this a worthwhile effort when we have so many other campaigns going on and we have limited resources? Why are you prioritizing this?
Well, I'm not necessarily telling anyone what to prioritize. There are, an infinite number of worthy campaigns out there, many of which have no relationship to anything I know anything about or am working on. But I think uh, that there is an opening here. There's something that's in the news that's happening, that's being done in a number of cities, that makes it easier to go to your city and say, others are doing this. Where are you? You need to represent us better. We've known for decades that this was bad policy. Here, this is the moment. This is the opportunity to change it. And this is an easy thing. This ought not to distract or take away resources and time and money from anything else, but it ought to open up some avenues for further victories down the road and for education of the public on these domestic issues and on international issues, on why there's an agency in the US government with so many deadly weapons and brutal, non-lethal weapons, that it's practically giving them away to local police departments. And where did this idea come from, that militaries and foreign militaries and private companies run by people whose mission it is to get soldiers to be willing to commit murder, that these people should be training local police departments to treat the people they're supposedly serving as a war enemy? How did our culture get to this point? And how, once we get our localities to do the right thing, how can we get national governments like the US government to do the right thing? Isn't there something more that's needed than stopping the militarization of the NYPD, or what former mayor of New York falsely claimed was the seventh biggest military on earth? What about the actual first biggest military on earth that's driving this agenda? What can we do about that? And so as we organize and educate more people through these campaigns that accomplish something very useful, very easily, very short term, we also are opening up activist and educational lanes toward something bigger.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And as you're saying, it helps to kind of connect these larger international issues and this kind of huge US military complex can be sometimes hard to grasp our heads around, and kind of it connects that locally and shows those cross connections between militarism abroad and then that coming back into our communities. Um, Okay, there's a question from Jake from Toronto who asks about the impact of Israeli military training on our police forces. Can you talk about that, and how can we kind of amplify that message that that's happening?
In fact, I have so many things going on so many related issues. Doing this particular campaign here in my city wasn't even my idea. It came from a woman who's a friend of mine and a supporter and activist in World Beyond War, who specifically wanted to ban Israeli military training of local police here, because the Israeli military is training local police departments in the United States. And my response was, yes, of course we want to do that, but I'd rather not be denounced as an anti-Semite if I don't have to be, because that predictable nonsense is very, very predictable. So why don't we instead ban military, or what they call warrior style training, by any military, the US military, any foreign military? We don't have to name them. Israel should count, even if some people think it's the 51st state, or anybody else, any private corporation, because there are those too. And if we're going to do that, why don't we ban the acquisition of military weaponry too? And so this is actually where it started, to get this petition going here in this town. And it is extremely bizarre to have, the military of a foreign country with, a horrendous human rights record and military record training local police departments in this country in war making. But it's happening, and it's important for people to be aware that it's happening, and to be made aware that it's happening without either encouraging anti-Semitism or encouraging false accusations of anti-Semitism, but simply making people aware that it's happening, and that it needs to be stopped.
Another question, this one from Ed and Ann in Syracuse. Hi, Ed and Ann. The question is, should police departments be allowed to recruit U.S. combat veterans, those who have been trained to kill?
So this was another point where people complained on our city council meeting Zoom calls that the petition I had introduced was not strong enough. They said, look, if you're going to ban military training, but you're going to have an official policy of preference in hiring, not just you're open to hiring people, but preference in hiring, discrimination against anyone else in hiring for people who are veterans of a military, that is, who have had military training, then aren't you going to be ending up with a number of people with military training, even though you've sworn off military training? Isn't this a problem? Shouldn't you at least make it an even playing field and not give preference to those with military training? But of course, this, is just asking for more accusations of bigotry than mentioning Israel, right? And so if you go to some of the media links about Charlottesville that we have on that webpage, I think the very first one there, you'll hear a radio show that I do where the host wants to know what I have against veterans and why don't I want them? How could I dare suggest banning the hiring of veterans? And he actually asks me, don't you think veterans would make the absolute best police officers because they've had military training? As if he had missed the entire point of the discussion, right? As if he wasn't making my point for me. And so, this is an area of treading on eggshells, but I think it's worth doing, and it's worth making as clear as possible to people that you're not for mistreating veterans and abusing veterans and discriminating against veterans. You're simply against discriminating against non-veterans, against anyone who hasn't participated in mass murderous escapades for the Pentagon.
Thanks. Okay, we have 2 raised hands. Bridget, you can now unmute.
Yes, I have 2 questions. First, I'll admit I didn't read everything coming up into this. So when it comes to banning military style weaponry, is it just going and saying, let's not use the 1033 program, period? Because I know when I looked through, I found a Freedom of Information Act for all of the state of Texas where I live, and up through 2014. And I found things as innocuous as toilet paper, so, the 1033 program isn't all about militarized weaponry. And if we don't just go with that, if we say it's militarized weaponry, how do we define that? Because there are things that are kind of broken down. You would say, oh, a site by itself isn't militarized, but you put the site with this, or they even had something like, anti-mine vehicle or mine resistant vehicle, I guess was what it was. Well, the way that's phrased, it's a defensive type thing. It's not a military. I mean, it is military, but anyway, so I guess the question is it better to go with trying to kind of stop the 1033 program or banning militarized weaponry? And if it's that, how do we define militarized weaponry? So that's my first question. The second question, here in Houston, luckily I just got this thing from our CitizensNet newsletter that has the police department and the county sheriff's office has this application for Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. And in that, they have things for training and for IT to help with the command post kind of things. There can be citizen input up till August 28th. So I guess my question here is should the strategy here be to respond to this request for input on these particular grants, or to be going with a petition such as what you did to kind of something completely new? Maybe that's something I can get with Greta with and have her look at what the grants proposal is, and she can advise me. But those are my two questions.
Yeah, I would say on the second one, I would need to look at it in some detail, either tonight or tomorrow before I disappear for 2 weeks, or Greta or someone else may be able to help you with it on a longer term basis. I'm inclined to suspect you're better off starting with something new as we're discussing here, but I can't really say. There may be some golden opportunity there that doesn't exist elsewhere that I haven't really understood yet. I can maybe say something a little more helpful on your first question. In terms of ending this national program of giving national war weaponry or selling it to local police departments and state police departments, we should be ending that on the federal level, and there are bills in Congress to do that. And the more that localities do it, the more it builds pressure for the national government to get rid of it. But what you can do locally, I think certainly should include, as we did in Charlottesville, banning the acquisition of any weaponry from that program. And I think even if the wording is anything from that program, and that includes toilet paper, I think that's fine, because, believe it or not, there are other sources of toilet paper, and we're better off not having local police departments interlocked with a military based on the need to get toilet paper or something else that can be acquired elsewhere just as well, if not better. But as we've discussed a number of times already on this call, I think going beyond what we did in Charlottesville and banning military weaponry, no matter where it comes from, would be very much better. And then you necessarily get into the question you've asked of what counts as military weaponry. And so the draft petition and draft resolution on the website that's linked in the chat is an attempt to do that, listing a number of types of weaponry, most, if not all of which, have recently been banned in a few places, including Seattle, though there's a bizarre court case about some of that in Seattle. And so I think the number one thing to do is to not get bogged down in detail and bizarre paradoxes and does it count as a military weapon if it has this particular feature or not, but figure out the worst half dozen weapons that you can clearly and easily define is basically what I've tried to do. But I'm hoping to get feedback and suggestions, and we'll revise the model resolution as we go along here. But figure out the very worst weapons that local police departments have, and in particular, any that you happen to know your local police department has that they have no business having and that can be clearly defined, and ban those. And there may be some others that you're not banning, but this is a start. This establishes the practice that your local government is going to ban particular types of weaponry, which makes it 100 times easier to come back in 6 months and say, we really need to ban these other two types of weaponry because you've established that practice. So I think the number one thing to do is to avoid getting bogged down in details and pick something clear and straightforward and get it done.
Okay, we have another raised hand from Hadi. Hadi, you can now unmute.
Hi, Hadi.
Hi, David. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good, good. Greetings from Dallas, Texas. A couple of questions. Number one, how do we find out what kind of military-grade weapons Dallas Police Department, in my case, has in their inventory? And my second question is, we're getting ready to have a meeting with Dallas Police Chief Renee Hall. What sort of pressure you think, or questions or suggestions or things we can say to her to help facilitate the demilitarization of Dallas Police?
Well, on the webpage that's linked in the chat and that you can find at WorldBeyondWar.org, we've got a link that should help you find out any weaponry that Dallas police have gotten through that program from the federal government. That doesn't tell you what military weaponry they've gotten from anywhere else. The ways to, I don't know a secret special answer to how you find that out. You ask them, you ask the city council members to ask them, you ask the mayor to ask them, you ask the local journalists to ask them, you hunt around and ask people in the know what they've already revealed they have, and how you approach the chief of police depends a little bit on what sort of person they are. Our local chief of police was very evasive and misleading, so that the city council asked her, do you have a mine resistant vehicle? This is something that came up a minute ago. It's, oh, no, of course not, nothing like that. Turns out they have what they call an armored personnel carrier, but it isn't really mine resistant, right? But it's the thing that everybody had seen and photographed and were asking about, right? And so is this a person who's going to be very evasive and misleading and choose their words so carefully to avoid admitting things? Or are they going to be forthcoming? So your questioning, sort of depends, but the more you can know going in, the better. And a lot of what we knew in Charlottesville in terms of what the police had came from local journalists and Freedom of Information Act requests, and from people with phones with cameras on them, who had photographed the stuff. And we had a Black Lives Matter rally, here while this was happening. And we had city police vehicles with state police in them. And again, people were asking the chief of police, who authorized this? Why was this happening? And she denied it was happening until people produced photographs of it, So it depends how honest your local government is, how much you have to rely on independent journalists and social media and people with phones. But I think the important thing is to not let them change the conversation, as they will try 1,000 times, to, we're not doing any of that stuff, and any of it that we are doing, we're going to stop, so you got nothing to worry about. That's not the conversation. It's, we need to ban any future city councils or police departments doing these horrible things next year or 5 years from now. We need to establish the legal requirement that they can't do these things in the future, because then debates over exactly what they are doing now may be interesting, but they aren't really relevant, and they can't get in the way of what you're trying to pass.
Thanks, David and Hadi. We have a couple minutes left. Allison, I want to come back to you and let you have a chance to share what you were talking about in terms of how you modified the petition language to make it more relevant to your community. So you can now unmute.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks. We haven't changed any of the first list of asks in the petition. So those of you who have had a chance to read through the petition that was drafted for Charlottesville, there's a list of asks saying that, the local police needs to end all military training, no matter who is providing it, and end all weapons acquisitions from the US military, in addition to not purchasing these certain X, Y, and Z weapons from any weapons dealer. But there's a second part that says, and require for your forces enhanced training for de-escalation. That simple one line is actually an entire multi-year package of police reform in one line. And it also triggers spending on training. So if you're in a town or city that's working on defunding or divestment, that line could come back to haunt you big time. So right now, what we're working on in the language for Portland is either removing it altogether and just making the concrete list of asks that these services and materials be banned from policing. Or we will keep it in, but it will be much stricter language, and it will say, using only funds currently appropriated in policing budgets, never additional funds. All training must be for complete conflict de-escalation with no use of force upon first assessing the scene. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We'll either use much stronger language or we won't include it at all. I think for us, the use of this petition is strictly as a means to move our city towards a community policing model, to honor all of the hard fought activism that Black and Brown people have done for the Black Lives Matter movement. So this is not actually an anti-war or demilitarization effort in Portland. It's a one step towards justice for Black and Brown communities in Portland. And it's something that anti-war people in Portland can offer to the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm also very wary of other movements glomming on to the energy that's been won by the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think it's really important when you discuss doing this in your city that you are bringing this as something that you can offer to the Black Lives Matter movement, not saying you've won all this energy and momentum, let me grab it so we can put forward this demilitarization agenda. So I think that framing is equally as important when you go to gather support for these petitions in your towns. So that's my roundup.
100% agreement. Very well said, and very much look forward to seeing what language you come up with, because others may want to plagiarize it for elsewhere in the country.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison, for sharing that. We are just about out of time. We want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar. We will share the recording afterwards, along with more links for additional resources. Again, we encourage you to go to our website, WorldBeyondWar.org, to learn more about this and our work in general, and also contact us at info@WorldBeyondWar.org so we can help you out with this campaign. David, any last thoughts?
No, appreciate you all being here and look forward to seeing what you accomplish.
Thanks, everyone.